Well, it's a beautiful day out here on the Sacramento River in Contra Costa County. We've got the bay in that direction, the delta in this direction. It's hard to believe that this lovely spot was the site of the worst disaster to strike the U.S. mainland during World War II. On a July night in 1944, hundreds of people, mostly African Americans, died here in an instant.
Once a year, people from all over the country gather here at the Concord Naval Weapons Station to honor those who gave their lives for their country.
We offer our thanks for the men and the women who have served our nation with distinction.
They were fathers.
Well, my father was killed in the initial explosion.
They were brothers.
Yes, I have a brother that was on the ship at the time that it exploded.
And they were friends.
It was devastating.
This is Port Chicago, the site of a mysterious and massive explosion that changed the lives of many people in the Bay Area and changed the course of history. Port Chicago is located about 35 miles east of San Francisco, off Highway 4, just north of Concord. During World War II, Port Chicago was a vital munitions depot. Liberty ships were loaded with armaments destined for battles in the Pacific.
Everything that went to the war front came out of this shipyard or Mare Island, and it was all hand-loaded into the holds of the ships.
And most of those munitions were hand-loaded by young African-American men serving under white officers.
We expected to go to sea. That was my whole ambition, was to get on a man of war.
But because of your color,
they didn't allow us that opportunity.
So you came out here and they put you to work?
Loading ammunition.
Spencer Sykes was one of the African-American sailors assigned to dangerous duties. He was just a teenager.
We had to fill the shells with nitropyrin.
Highly explosive stuff.
Highly explosive.
No training.
No training, no gloves.
My division had a job going around from each magazine and keeping ammunition stored.
DeWitt Jameson was only 19 years old when he was stationed at Port Chicago.
They were trained to load, but I don't think anybody here on this base was trained to load the type of arms that we were loading.
The young black men received second-class training, and in every way, they were second-class citizens. The Navy was strictly segregated.
We had signs that said, "No," with the N-word, allowed in the bathroom. We couldn't even go to the bathroom. We had to go a half a mile down the pier to go to the bathroom.
Despite the pervasive racism, the men willingly loaded the volatile but vital cargo. But on the night of July 17, 1944, just after 10 p.m., something went terribly wrong.
The first explosion, it shook me very, very hard. But the second one, it knocked me from my bunk. I went all the way to the ceiling. When it hit the floor, I didn't come back down on my bed. I hit the floor and I stayed there.
Spencer felt the blast in a movie theater in Berkeley, 30 miles away.
And they said, if there are any military in the theater and you're stationed at Port Chicago, report back immediately. The base just blew up. Oh my, I said, oh my God.
In fact, 2 explosions had ripped through 2 ships and several railroad cars, filled with 11 million pounds of explosives.
There was a plane that was passing over that saw molten metal going past the plane at 10,000 feet.
It was, at that moment, the largest man-made explosion in history. 320 men working on the ships and docks were killed instantly. 202 were African American. Some believe the blast was caused by saboteurs. Others think it was an accident waiting to happen, caused by poor equipment and poor training. Officially, the cause is simply listed as unknown. The truth vaporized along with all the eyewitnesses.
I'll say over the half of people died in this. They'll never be found. They'll never be found. Just blow them to bits.
There wasn't much time for mourning. The war was on, and within a few weeks, officers were ordering men to load munitions at Mare Island and Vallejo with no improved training.
They just refused to do what they asked them to do.
Because they felt they needed to have better training?
That's correct.
50 men were arrested for refusing to work until they had proper training. They were convicted in the largest mutiny trial in U.S. history.
And I don't like to use that word mutiny because there was no mutiny. In a mutiny, there is people fighting each other or trying to take over something. This never happened.
Most of the so-called mutineers were released from prison in 1946, thanks to the intervention of Eleanor Roosevelt. 2 years later, President Harry Truman finally desegregated all branches of the U.S. military.
I don't like to say it had taken something like this to bring on this diversity, but it did.
Today, there's a memorial near the blast site, etched with the names of the victims, and a chapel with a visitor center where the story of Port Chicago is told.
These piers are the only thing that's left historically of the infrastructure that was here in 1944. The top of the piers were blown off, and this whole area was rubble after the explosion.
Glenn Fuller is the National Park Superintendent in charge of the memorial. He leads pre-arranged tours around the site, passing old bunkers with vintage railroad cars, shells like those the men loaded by hand, and fragments of the blast.
From that ship.
No, right over here.
This is a good example. This is the hull of the E.A. Bryan.
And every year, around the anniversary of the explosion, survivors, family members, and friends come here to pay tribute to those who lost their lives and to learn from the injustices faced by those who survived.
I don't have any regrets for what I did or what I contributed. I don't think any of us regret what we did. It was the way we were treated.
These distinguished older men moved on following the war and have lived full and productive lives. They aren't bitter, but they urge us to remember the long-ago lessons of their youth so we never repeat them.
You can't forget it. What happened here, you'll never forget it because we went through hell.